It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday when the notification appeared. I was deep in compliance work for an $890 million federal telecom deal, the largest in our firm's history and one I'd spent 18 months building from the ground up. The preview line read, Final leadership assignments, Hayes situation.my name, reduced to a problem needing management. I clicked .an internal email thread between my manager Zachary Holt, my idea thief for the past 6 months, and 3 senior executives lay exposed. He meant to reply privately. Instead he hit reply all. And I was still on the list. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. Edmund Carlisle, Chief Strategy Officer. Zach? Where does Juliet fit post-close? Treasury wants leadership bios. Zachary responded at 10:52 p.m. Juliet's been invaluable on the build side. Her technical work is solid. But let's be realistic about optics. Juliet's brilliant, but she's not the face of a deal this size. She's support infrastructure, not executive presence. He proposed moving me into a senior advisory role, off the main team, out of sight, framed as a promotion. She's pragmatic enough not to make waves. The real leadership team would be everyone but me. I didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Just felt a cold clarity. The pattern I'd ignored for months snapped into focus. I screenshot it. Forwarded it to my personal account. Printed it. Backed it up 3 ways. In my world, documentation is power. Then I closed my laptop, poured a glass of water and stared at the city lights. Anger would come later. Now I was calculating. Zachary had made a classic mistake. He assumed I wouldn't see it. That I'd accept his version of events. That I was too pragmatic to fight. He was wrong. This deal was mine. I wrote the proposal alone, over a weekend while he was at a Napa retreat posting about strategic vision. I built the framework, negotiated with 14 subcontractors, turned cold contacts into champions. I did all the work. He took credit and rose. My career stalled. I stayed quiet, believing results would speak for themselves. The email proved no one cared who built it, only who looked like they belonged. That night I compiled every email, document, meeting note. By 4 a.m. I had a timeline. 47 instances of my work rebranded as his. Not for justice. For leverage. I forwarded the email to my attorney, Diane Frost. She called at 6:30 am. Tell me you saved everything. I did. Good. This isn't just credit theft. It's constructive demotion. Discrimination. He said you don't look the part. Do you think he'd say that about a man with your credentials? We both knew the answer. The next morning I walked into the office early. Files I'd authored had already been moved to an archive folder, buried under Zachary's name. He was rewriting history. I copied them back, secured the backups and scheduled a meeting with General Counsel. The game had changed. I wasn't disappearing. I was making myself impossible to ignore. The next morning I found Zachary had moved my key project files into an archive historical reference folder, burying my contributions under documents where he was listed as the primary author. He was rewriting history, so I restored the files and backed up everything to my personal drive. Then I scheduled a meeting with General Counsel Lillian Petrov, someone whose sharp legal instincts I knew could cut through corporate deflection. Zachary tried to set up his own meeting later that day, titled Quick Sync Your Next Phase, timed right after my appointment with Lillian. He was moving fast, unaware I'd already spent the night building a case that could dismantle his narrative. Over the weekend my attorney Diane and I strategized. This is constructive demotion, she said, reviewing the email. And those optics comments open the door to a discrimination claim. We'll use the lawsuit as leverage. You don't file unless you have to, but you prepare like you will. I had the documentation, 47 instances of my work repackaged as his. All I needed was a plan. Go to Lillian, Diane advised. Stay calm. Present the facts. Show her the email. Ask for clarity on your role. If they won't see it your way, make it clear the alternative is public exposure. Monday arrived. I walked into Lillian's office composed, placed the folder on her desk, email, summary, proof, and stated my case. I was the architect of the deal and I wouldn't be sidelined. She read it, looked up and said, "Juliet, what you're showing me is a liability for the firm, not you. When she asked if I wanted to pursue external remedies, I replied, no. I want recognition. My name on the leadership team. And assurance this doesn't happen again. Lillian nodded. Then give me everything. I'll bring in leadership. This ends here. I gave Lillian the USB drive with all my documentation, meticulously organized. She slid it into her drawer and laid out the rules. No contact with Zachary, all communication through her office. I nodded, understanding this was now a legal matter, not an HR conversation. As I left, she confirmed I'd done the right thing. Zachary's meeting invite still loomed for that afternoon. Minutes before, I emailed him. I was rescheduling, coordinating through Lillian's office. He replied confused, "Why Lillian?" But I didn't answer. His calls went to voicemail. By late afternoon, the response came from the top. A meeting scheduled for Thursday with Lillian, Edmund Carlisle, Zachary and me. It was happening. The next 3 days were tense but focused. Zachary and I moved through the office like ghosts, avoiding each other, communicating only through clipped emails. He knew something had shifted, he just didn't know how far it had gone. Thursday morning, I walked into the 10th floor conference room calm and centered. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. Lillian opened the meeting by presenting the evidence, a side-by-side of my documented work and how it had been credited to Zachary. "Can you explain the discrepancy?" she asked him. He deflected, calling it a team effort and his role one of strategic oversight. Lillian cut through it. "You claimed in your own words, I've developed a novel approach. Not we. You." Edmund leaned in. "And the email where you said Juliet wasn't the face of the deal. Do you remember that?" Zachary paled. "I was speaking candidly about positioning." "You were creating liability," Lillian countered. "That's what matters." Silence fell. He looked at me. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching. Edmund turned to me. "What do you want?" "I want credit for my work. I want my name on the leadership team. And a formal acknowledgement that my contributions were essential." "That's reasonable," Edmund said. Lillian recommended I be named co-lead with an official memo clarifying my role. Agreed. The meeting ended. Zachary left without a word. As I stepped out, Edmund called after me. "I'm sorry you had to fight for what you'd already earned." "You're right," I said. "But I did. And now it's fixed." The next day the memo went out. I was officially co-lead, recognized as instrumental to the $890 million deal. My inbox flooded with congratulatory messages from colleagues I'd worked with over the years, people who'd watched me build the deal from the ground up and knew the truth of what had happened. Some of them were genuinely happy. Others were just relieved they didn't have to pretend anymore. Zachary didn't email me. He didn't call. We passed each other in the hallway once that week and he looked straight ahead like I wasn't there. That was fine. I didn't need his acknowledgement. I had everyone else's. But the real change wasn't in the memo or the title or the emails. It was in the meetings that followed. When we presented to the client the next week, my name was on the first slide. When we briefed the Senate Oversight Committee a month later, I was the one who walked them through the technical specifications. When the deal finally closed in November, I was the one who signed the contract alongside Edmund Carlisle, with Zachary standing 2 feet to the left, present but peripheral. 6 months after the Reply All incident, I got promoted to Senior Director of Infrastructure Strategy. Zachary remained in his role, his trajectory flattened by the internal review Lillian had conducted. He stayed with the firm, but everyone knew. The kind of knowing that doesn't require explicit conversation. The kind that changes how people see you. I never spoke to him about the email. Never confronted him directly. Never needed to. Because the truth, once documented and elevated, does its own work. It doesn't require performance or dramatics. It just requires persistence. One afternoon in late spring, I was working late in my new office, larger than the cubicle I'd occupied for years, with windows that overlooked the city. My phone buzzed with a message from Diane Frost, my attorney. "Saw the news about your promotion. Proud of you. You earned it twice." I smiled and set the phone down. He was right. I had earned it twice. Once through the work itself. Once through the fight to make that work visible. And that, I realized, was the cost of being a woman in spaces not designed for you. You do the work. Then you do the work of proving you did the work. And if you're lucky, if you're strategic, if you document everything and refuse to accept the narrative others construct about you, sometimes you win. Not because the system is fair, but because you make it too expensive to ignore you. 2 years later, I was leading a team of 14 people on a $1.2 billion federal modernization project. My name was on the proposal from day one. My title was unambiguous. And when Zachary Holt left the firm to take a position at a smaller consultancy in another state, no one was surprised. I didn't celebrate his departure. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. I just felt tired, the kind of tired that comes from years of fighting battles that shouldn't have been battles in the first place. But I also felt something else. A quiet certainty that I'd change something. Not just for myself but for the women who would come after me, who would inherit a slightly less hostile system because I'd insisted it acknowledge me. That certainty didn't make the fight easier. But it made it worth it. And on the nights when I wondered if I should have just accepted the advisory role Zachary had planned for me, if I should have avoided the conflict and the discomfort and the risk, I thought about that reply all email. I thought about the words, support infrastructure, and not the face of a deal this size. I thought about how close I came to never seeing those words. How close I came to being quietly erased from something I'd built. And I knew I'd made the right choice. Because power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it's just the refusal to disappear. The insistence that your name stays on the work you created. The willingness to fight for credit not because you're insecure, but because credit is currency and currency determines who gets to build the next thing. I stayed. I fought. I won. Not perfectly. Not without scars. But I won. And that, I decided, was enough. The final time I saw Zachary was at an industry conference 3 years after the Reply All incident. He was on a panel discussing leadership in public-private partnerships. And I was in the audience because the conference organizers had asked me to keynote the following day. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, I watched him speak for 20 minutes about strategic vision and team management and I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a distant awareness that we'd both moved on in different directions with different reputations. After his panel ended, I ran into Edmund Carlisle near the coffee station. He'd retired from the firm the previous year but still consulted on major deals. Juliet, he said warmly. I heard about the keynote. Congratulations. Thank you. He glanced toward the room where Zachary's panel had just concluded. Did you catch any of that? I did. He nodded slowly. He's good at talking about leadership. Always has been. Just not as good at practicing it. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound petty or self-serving. Edmund sipped his coffee and looked at me thoughtfully. You know, after everything that happened with that telecom deal, I went back and read every document in the project file. Really read it, not just skimmed. And I realized something. You didn't just build that deal. You built the methodology we still use for every major infrastructure proposal. The compliance frameworks, the subcontractor vetting process, the client relationship model. All of it came from you. It was a collaborative effort, I said automatically, the kind of deflection I'd learned to offer in professional settings. No, Edmund said firmly. It wasn't. And that's the problem. We spent years letting people like Zachary take credit for work people like you actually did. And it took you nearly losing that deal for us to see it clearly. That's on us, not you. He paused, then added, for what it's worth, I'm glad you fought. I'm glad you didn't let it go. Because if you hadn't, we'd still be operating the same way. And a lot of talented people would keep getting buried. I thanked him and moved toward the exit, feeling something shift inside me. Not vindication exactly. More like closure. The kind that comes when someone in power admits the system was broken, even if they can't fully fix it. My keynote the next day was titled Building Infrastructure. Technical and Institutional. I talked about the $890 million telecom deal, the frameworks I'd developed, the lessons I'd learned about navigating federal procurement. I didn't mention Zachary. I didn't mention the Reply All email. I didn't need to. Because the story I told was about persistence, documentation, and the quiet work of ensuring your contributions don't get erased. It was about building systems that survive beyond individual projects. And it was about the difference between visibility and validation. At the end, during Q&A, a young woman in the third row raised her hand. How do you handle situations where your work gets attributed to someone else? She asked. How do you fight that without seeming difficult or combative? I thought about all the answers I could give. The strategic ones, the careful ones, the ones that wouldn't make me sound bitter or aggrieved. is that I told her the truth. You document everything. You build your case quietly and thoroughly. And when the moment comes, when you have the evidence and the leverage and the platform, you don't ask for recognition. You claim it. Not loudly. Not emotionally. But firmly. Because the alternative is letting someone else define your contribution. And that's not an option. She nodded, and I saw something in her expression that I recognized. The exhaustion of fighting battles that shouldn't exist. The determination to fight them anyway. After the keynote, she approached me near the stage. Up close, she looked younger than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of sharp-eyed intensity that comes from being underestimated too many times. I'm Casey, she said, extending her hand. I work at a mid-sized engineering consultancy. My manager just took credit for a transit proposal I wrote. Word for word. And when I brought it up to HR, they told me I was being overly sensitive about collaboration. I knew that story. I'd lived that story. And I knew what came next if she didn't act decisively. Do you have documentation? I asked. Emails. Drafts with my metadata. Meeting notes where I presented the concepts before he repackaged them. Then you have a case. Find an attorney who specializes in employment law. Don't wait for HR to solve this. They won't. Their job is to protect the company, not you. She nodded slowly, and I saw the resolve forming behind her eyes. The same resolve I'd felt sitting in my apartment at midnight, staring at Zachary's email and deciding I wouldn't let it stand. Thank you, she said, for saying it out loud. For not pretending it's about working harder or being a better team player. It helps to know someone else fought this and won. I gave her my card. If you need guidance, reach out. No one should have to figure this out alone. She thanked me again and walked away, and I stood there for a moment watching the conference attendees filter out of the ballroom. So many smart, capable people navigating invisible obstacles, building brilliant work in systems designed to obscure their contributions. And I realized that the fight I'd fought wasn't just about me. It was about shifting the baseline. Making it slightly harder for the next Zachary Holt to erase the next Juliet Hayes. Back at the office the following week, I received a formal letter from the Department of Infrastructure. They wanted to discuss a new project, something even larger than the telecom deal. A nationwide cybersecurity overhaul for critical infrastructure systems. Estimated value, $1.4 billion. They wanted me to lead the proposal development. Not co-lead. Not support. Lead. The letter included a paragraph that caught my attention. Based on your demonstrated expertise in the telecommunications infrastructure partnership and your comprehensive understanding of federal compliance frameworks, we believe you are uniquely qualified to architect this initiative. We look forward to collaborating directly with you. Directly with you. Not with my firm. With me. I read the letter 3 times, then walked down to Lillian Petrov's office. She was on a call but waved me in when she saw my expression. When she hung up, I slid the letter across her desk. I need to negotiate my contract before I commit to this, I said. Lillian read the letter, and a slow smile spread across her face. Smart. What are you thinking? Partner track. Equity stake. And full autonomy over team composition and project execution. No more co-leads. No more oversight from managers who contribute nothing but take credit for everything. That's a significant ask. It's a significant project. And I'm the only one who can deliver it. Lillian leaned back in her chair, studying me. You've changed, Juliet. 2 years ago you would have accepted this project and hoped the recognition followed. Now you're setting terms. 2 years ago I thought competence was enough. Now I know better. Good, Lillian said. Write up your terms. I'll take them to Edmund and the board. Given what the Department of Infrastructure is requesting, I don't think you'll get much pushback. He was right. 3 weeks later, I signed a new contract that included partnership consideration within 18 months, a significant equity position, and complete operational authority over the cybersecurity project. My title changed to Principal Director. My compensation increased by 40%. And most importantly, my name was the first one listed on every document, every presentation, every client communication. Not because someone decided to be generous. Because I'd made it clear that the alternative was losing the project entirely. The cybersecurity initiative took 2 years to build and another year to implement. It was the most complex project I'd ever managed, involving coordination across 12 federal agencies, 43 subcontractors, and endless layers of classified briefings and security clearances. There were moments when I questioned whether the fight had been worth it. Late nights when I was alone in my office, buried under technical specifications and compliance audits, wondering if I'd traded one form of exhaustion for another. But then I'd look at my team. 15 people, 8 of whom were women, 3 of whom had reached out to me specifically because they'd heard about the telecom deal and wanted to work for someone who wouldn't erase them. I'd built something beyond a single project. I'd built a space where competence was recognized, where credit flowed to the people who earned it, where documentation and precision mattered more than office politics and strategic positioning. Was it perfect? No. We still operated within a larger system that rewarded performance over substance, visibility over execution. But within our corner of that system we'd created something different. And that difference mattered. The project closed in September, 3 years after the reply all email that had changed everything. The client was thrilled. The implementation had gone flawlessly. And the revenue exceeded projections by 18%. At the closing ceremony held in a federal building downtown with representatives from all participating agencies, I stood at the podium and delivered remarks that had taken me weeks to write. I didn't talk about the struggle. I didn't mention Zachary or the battles I'd fought to get there. Instead, I talked about the team. About the engineers who'd solved impossible technical challenges. About the compliance specialists who'd navigated regulatory frameworks most people didn't know existed. About the project managers who'd kept 43 moving pieces synchronized across 2 years. I named them. All of them. Every single person who'd contributed, with specific acknowledgments of what they'd accomplished. Because that's what leadership looks like when you've been on the other side of erasure. You make damn sure no one else experiences what you did. After the ceremony, I received congratulatory messages from dozens of people, including several senior officials from agencies I'd worked with over the years. But the message that meant the most came from Casey, the young woman I'd met at the conference 2 years earlier. Just won my case. Settlement includes back pay, promotion, and formal acknowledgement of my contributions. Starting a new role next month where I'll actually get credit for my work. Thank you for showing me it was possible. I read it standing in the parking garage waiting for my car and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not satisfaction exactly. Something quieter. The knowledge that the ripples extended beyond me, that the fight I'd fought had made someone else's fight slightly easier. That was worth every sleepless night. Every tense meeting. Every moment of doubt. Partnership came through 6 months ahead of schedule. The board voted unanimously, citing my track record, my revenue generation, and my leadership on the cybersecurity initiative. Edmund Carlisle, now fully retired but still on the board as an advisor, called me personally to deliver the news. Juliet, congratulations. You've earned this 10 times over. Thank you, Edmund. There's something else, he said, his tone shifting. The board wants to establish a new internal policy. Attribution standards for major projects. Documentation requirements. Regular audits to ensure credit flows appropriately. They're calling it the Hayes Protocol. I was quiet for a moment, processing what that meant. My name, formalized into company policy, designed to prevent what had happened to me from happening to anyone else. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Build great work. Demand recognition. And don't let anyone convince you that ambition is unfeminine or that fighting for credit makes you difficult. After we hung up, I sat in my office with the lights off, looking out at the city below. The skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun, buildings stacked against each other in endless vertical competition. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. The one who believed that quiet competence would eventually be rewarded. The one who documented her work but didn't insist on acknowledgement. The one who thought survival meant staying small enough not to threaten anyone. That woman was gone. Not erased but evolved. Sharpened by experience into something harder, more deliberate, less willing to compromise on things that mattered. I didn't regret the evolution. But I mourned the necessity of it. The fact that transformation had required conflict. That recognition had required a fight. Still I'd won. Not just the battle with Zachary but the larger war against invisibility. And in winning, I'd built something that would outlast both of us. 5 years after the reply all email, I was managing a portfolio of projects worth over $3 billion. My team had grown to 32 people, and our division had become the most profitable in the firm's history. Zachary Holt's name occasionally appeared in industry publications, usually attached to mid-level projects at firms smaller than ours. He'd never recovered the trajectory he'd had before the internal review. And while I took no pleasure in his diminished status, I also felt no guilt about it. He'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. The system had, for once, worked the way it was supposed to. I still kept the original reply all email. Not printed on my wall or framed like a trophy. Just saved in an encrypted folder on my personal drive, alongside all the other documentation I'd compiled during those 18 months. I looked at it occasionally. Not out of anger or vindication but as a reminder. That one moment of carelessness on his part, one failure to check the recipient list before hitting send, had exposed a truth that might have stayed hidden forever. And that truth had changed everything. Not just for me but for the dozens of people who'd reached out over the years, sharing their own stories of erasure and asking for guidance. For the junior analysts on my team who knew their work would be acknowledged. For the women entering the industry who would benefit from the Hayes Protocol and never know why it existed. The fight wasn't over. It never is. Systems that spent centuries reinforcing certain hierarchies don't transform overnight because one woman refused to disappear. But the baseline had shifted. The cost of erasure had increased. And the path I'd carved, however imperfect, had made the next fight slightly less lonely. On the 7th anniversary of the Reply All incident, I received an unexpected email. The sender was listed as Z. Holt. For a moment I considered deleting it unread. We hadn't spoken in 7 years and I had no interest in reopening old wounds or relitigating past conflicts. But curiosity won. I opened it. The email was brief, just 3 paragraphs. Juliet, I know this email is years overdue and I don't expect a response. But I wanted to acknowledge something I should have acknowledged a long time ago. You built the telecom deal. You did the work, made the strategic decisions and navigated the complexities that made it successful. I took credit because the system made it easy to take credit and I lacked the integrity to resist that ease. What happened after the Reply All email was painful but it was deserved. I've spent the past 7 years trying to rebuild my reputation and learning slowly what leadership actually means. It doesn't mean taking credit. It means ensuring credit flows to the people who earn it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did and I'm sorry. You deserved better. I read it twice, then set my phone down and stared out the window for a long time. Part of me wanted to dismiss it. Too little too late. Words without action. An apology designed more to ease his conscience than to repair harm. But another part of me recognized something genuine in the message. Not a justification or an excuse, just an acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, even years delayed, had value. I didn't respond immediately. I let the email sit in my inbox for 3 days while I considered whether responding was necessary, whether it would reopen something better left closed. Finally I wrote back. 1 paragraph. Zachary, I appreciate the acknowledgement. What happened was a learning experience for both of us, though in different ways. I hope you've built work you're proud of and I hope you've learned to recognize the people who help you build it. That's all any of us can do. I hit send and closed the email app. That was enough. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just closure. The kind that comes when both parties acknowledge the truth and move forward without pretense. 10 years after the Reply All email, I was sitting in a Senate hearing room, testifying before a subcommittee on infrastructure modernization. The topic was federal contracting practices and how to ensure taxpayer dollars were invested in projects with genuine accountability and expertise. A senator from the Oversight Committee asked me a question that brought everything full circle. Ms. Hayes, you've managed some of the largest infrastructure projects in the country over the past decade. In your experience, what's the biggest obstacle to effective project execution? I thought about all the diplomatic answers I could give. The ones that wouldn't offend anyone or create controversy. The safe responses that keep you in everyone's good graces. Glad I told the truth. The biggest obstacle is misallocated credit. When the people doing the work aren't the people getting recognition, you create systems where competence is invisible and performance is rewarded over substance. That leads to failed projects, cost overruns, and outcomes that don't serve the public interest. The senator leaned forward. Can you elaborate? Certainly. In my career, I've seen brilliant engineers sidelined because they didn't have the right pedigree or the right appearance. I've seen women do the foundational work on major deals and then watch men present that work as their own. I've seen entire projects nearly collapse because the people with expertise were excluded from decision-making in favor of people with better optics. I paused, then added, if we want infrastructure systems that work, we need procurement processes that reward actual expertise, not the ability to perform expertise. That means rigorous documentation standards, transparent attribution practices, and consequences for people who systematically take credit for work they didn't do. The hearing room was silent. Then the senator nodded slowly. That's a compelling argument, Ms. Hayes. And one I think this committee should take seriously as we draft new procurement guidelines. 3 months later, those guidelines became federal policy. They included mandatory attribution standards, third-party audits of project credit allocation, and mechanisms for contributors to dispute misattribution without career retaliation. They weren't perfect. They wouldn't solve everything. But they were a start. And they existed in part because I'd refused to let one reply-all email define my career. 15 years after the incident, I was keynoting a conference on women in infrastructure when a young woman approached me during the reception. She introduced herself as a graduate student researching barriers to advancement in male-dominated industries. I've been studying your career, she said. Specifically the telecom deal and what happened after. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret fighting? I mean, you won, obviously. But was the cost worth it? The stress, the conflict, the years of battling a system that didn't want to change. I considered the question carefully. It deserved more than a reflexive answer. There were moments when I questioned it, I said finally. Late nights when I was alone building case files instead of sleeping. Meetings where I knew I was being seen as difficult, combative, unwilling to be a team player. Times when I wondered if I should have just accepted the advisory role and moved on with my life. So do you regret it? No. Because the alternative wasn't peace. It was erasure. And erasure isn't a neutral state. It's a slow disappearance that happens so gradually you don't notice until you've vanished entirely. She nodded, absorbing that. The fight was hard, I continued. But it was finite. Erasure is forever. I chose the finite fight. And in choosing it, I changed not just my trajectory but the trajectory of everyone who came after me. That's not arrogance. That's just fact. She thanked me and walked away, and I stood there thinking about all the versions of myself that had existed over the past 15 years. The uncertain woman who'd opened that email at midnight. The determined one who'd built a case file. The scared one sitting across from Lilian Petrov. The vindicated one watching Zachary walk out of the conference room. They were all me. All necessary. All part of the evolution from someone who hoped the system would reward competence to someone who demanded it. 20 years after the reply-all email, I retired from active project management. My portfolio was passed to a successor I'd personally mentored. A woman named Aaliyah Rodriguez, who had the technical brilliance and strategic vision to take everything I'd built and expand it further. On my last day, the firm threw a reception. Speeches were given. Awards were presented. People I'd worked with for decades shared stories about projects we'd completed, obstacles we'd overcome, systems we'd transformed. But the moment that meant the most came afterward, when Lilian Petrov, now semi-retired herself, pulled me aside. Juliet, there's something I never told you about that meeting. The one where we confronted Zachary. What's that? Before you brought me that email, I knew. Not the specifics but the pattern. I'd seen Zachary take credit for other people's work for years. And I'd done nothing about it because it wasn't egregious enough to warrant intervention. Or so I told myself. She paused, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Regret. When you walked into my office with that documentation, I realized I'd been complicit. Not actively but through inaction. I'd let it happen because addressing it would have been uncomfortable, difficult, politically complicated. And that failure is on me. Lilian. Let me finish. What you did, fighting when you had every reason not to, forced this firm to change. Not because we wanted to, but because you made staying the same more expensive than evolving. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had in your position. And I'm grateful you had it. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just thanked her and moved on to the next conversation, but her words stayed with me. Because that was the truth of systemic change. It doesn't happen because institutions suddenly develop consciences. It happens because people make the cost of injustice too high to ignore. I'd been one of those people. Not the first, not the last, but one of them. And that, I decided as I walked out of the office for the final time, was enough. The reply all email is still saved on my personal drive. I've never deleted it. Probably never will. Not as a trophy or a reminder of a battle won, but as evidence. That one moment of carelessness can expose entire systems. That documentation matters more than rage. That quiet, strategic persistence can reshape the spaces we occupy. People sometimes ask me if I would have done anything differently. If I'd go back and change the way I fought or the choices I made. The answer is no. Because every choice, every document saved, every meeting endured, every moment of doubt pushed through, led to something larger than my individual vindication. It led to the Hayes Protocol. To federal attribution standards. To dozens of people who reached out over the years saying, "I saw what you did and it gave me the courage to fight my own battle." That's the true measure of victory. Not personal gain, though that came. Not revenge, though justice was served. But the knowledge that the system shifted even slightly because you refused to let it erase you. Zachary Holt sent me a card when I retired. It was brief, just 2 lines. "Congratulations on an extraordinary career. You changed this industry for the better." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We'd both moved on in different directions, carrying different lessons from the same event. He'd learned that credit theft has consequences. I'd learned that fighting for recognition isn't vanity. It's survival. And survival, I've discovered, is just another word for refusing to disappear. The final piece of this story happened last month, 23 years after the reply all email that started everything. I was invited to speak at a university commencement, one of those honorary degree ceremonies where they bring in someone from industry to offer wisdom to graduates about to enter the workforce. I almost declined. I'd given enough speeches, shared enough stories. What more could I add? But then I thought about that young woman at the conference 15 years ago, asking if the fight had been worth it. And I thought about Casey, who'd won her case because I'd shown her it was possible. And I thought about all the people I'd never meet who might benefit from hearing one more time that competence deserves recognition, and silence isn't strategy. So I accepted. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of graduates in their caps and gowns, I told them about the $890 million deal. About the 18 months of work. About the reply all email. I told them about documentation, leverage, and the difference between hope and strategy. And I told them the truth that took me too long to learn. You will build brilliant things, I said. Things that matter, that change systems, that improve lives. And there will be people, well-meaning or otherwise, who will try to take credit for what you built. They'll do it subtly through language and positioning and the quiet rewriting of history. When that happens, you have 2 choices. You can let it go, tell yourself it doesn't matter, that recognition will come eventually through some meritocratic force that doesn't actually exist. Or you can fight. Fighting doesn't mean yelling. It doesn't mean burning bridges or sabotaging relationships. It means documenting your work with the same rigor you bring to the work itself. It means demanding credit not as a favor but as a right. And it means understanding that the people who tell you to be patient, to wait your turn, to focus on being a team player, are often the ones benefiting from your patience. I paused, then delivered the line I'd been building toward. 23 years ago, someone sent an email they didn't mean to send. And that email exposed a truth I'd been too afraid to confront. That I was brilliant, essential, and invisible. And that if I didn't fight to change that, no one would do it for me. I fought. I won. And in winning, I made it slightly easier for the people who came after me to fight their own battles. That's what I'm asking you to do. Not for yourselves, though you deserve recognition for the work you'll do. But for the people who come after you. Build brilliant things. Demand credit. And when the system resists, document your case and fight harder. The applause was thunderous. But more importantly, I saw recognition in the faces of students throughout the auditorium. The ones who'd already experienced being overlooked. The ones who would face that battle in 6 months or a year or 5 years. I'd given them permission to fight. And tools to win. That night, sitting alone in my hotel room, I opened my laptop one final time and pulled up the reply all email. I read Zachary's words again. She's support infrastructure, not executive presence. For 23 years, those words had lived in my memory. A reminder of how I'd been seen and how I'd refused to accept that vision. But now, reading them again, I felt something different. Not anger or vindication but distance. The words had power once, but that power had been spent. Used up in the fight that followed, transformed into policies and protocols and protections that would outlast both of us. Zachary Holt had tried to erase me. Instead, he'd given me the evidence I needed to become unerasable. That's the thing about documentation. It doesn't just preserve truth. It weaponizes it. And when you know how to wield that weapon, when you understand that patience isn't virtue and silence isn't strategy, you become something corporate America fears more than ambition or anger. You become unignorable. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. Tomorrow I'd fly home. I'd return to the life I'd built, the reputation I'd earned, the legacy I'd constructed from 18 months of work and one accidentally sent email. But tonight I let myself rest. And that, finally, was enough. Maybe.